Good morning, good morning. Good morning, LinkedIn Live. We are live. How are you doing? Happy Friday. I hope you've had a good week. If you are here in the UK, the weather's been pretty good, right? So hopefully you've had some good weather this week. Yeah, we are going to get into.
All right, I'm just changing some of my technology in the background. We're going to be getting into career advancement. I can't tell you how many conversations I have literally every week around this topic of career advancement for ERG leaders in particular. So if I'm not talking to DI leads where maybe they've got ERG leads who are struggling, kind of like juggling the day job, I'm often talking to ERG leads themselves who are struggling because they either can't get that next promotion or they are definitely feeling pigeonholed. This is something that's coming up quite a lot. I have a monthly coaching call with all of my ERG leads that have been through my training, and I had a handful of them on yesterday, and it did feel a little bit like the doctor's surgery, in terms of some individuals talking about some of the challenges in terms of juggling the day job. That is always a common thing, but also this thing around. I do feel as though I may be getting a little bit pigeonholed. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to tackle it from a few angles. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the day job. So how do you manage that conflict in terms of day job versus managing the employee network, right? And the strain that that can create in terms of on your time and your stress levels and your headspace, right? And all of those sorts of things. I'm then going to talk about the importance of sponsors. How can I not talk about sponsors when we're talking about career advancement, right? Sponsorship is everything. And if you are watching live, by the way, good morning. I feel like I forgot to say good morning. If you're watching live, good morning. Thank you for joining. Please do put a comment in the chat. Hopefully I will see it because the comments have been a little bit glitchy on the technology. So I'm going to be talking about the importance of a sponsor, of course, absolutely critical. The skills gap. So is there a skills gap that is maybe blocking your advancement anyway? So aside from the fact that you run an ERG or an employee network and that is a pull on your time and your energy and your focus, is there actually a skills gap that's actually blocking your next move? So I'm going to talk about how you can figure out what that might be and how to fill in that gap. And then I'm going to talk about sideways versus upwards moves. And there's also diagonal as well that we might talk about if there is time. And then finally, I'm going to talk about breaking out of that ERG pigeonhole. So if you have been pigeonholed as the ERG person or the activist, because I think often it does get sort of labeled as that thing, activism, and activism that isn't necessarily for the benefit of the business. So if you've been labeled with that and it's maybe not in the most positive light, how do you actually break out of that pigeonhole? So that is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's get into it. First and foremost, right, everybody that knows me, you will know that to employee network leaders, I always say your day job comes first. Day job comes first. Day job comes first. I have to repeat it just in case the message isn't clear. But how do you make sure that you don't kind of run out of time for the day job, and or that you have the headspace and the ability to focus on the day job when you are also trying to run an employee network? And bearing in mind, most people that run employee networks tend to be at least junior or middle management. These don't tend to be roles that people do at sort of like when they're in their entry level, where they maybe have got lots of capacity in their day job. So it can actually be quite challenging ask to actually do a big busy day job as well as leading the network. So I always say day job comes first. So how do you actually navigate it? Well, you can set boundaries, right? You can set boundaries in terms of not taking on too much, and that can be both in terms of day job and the amount of work that you take on and sort of like volunteer for, although we will come on to volunteering for work a little bit later, but things like working hours and switching off. So not taking so much on that your stress levels are through the roof, and you're not able to focus on the day job, and actually you're not able to switch off and make sure that you are well emotionally and physically to actually be able to do the day job. So you have to be able to set clear boundaries, whether that be even actually with your line manager or with other people that you're doing work with and work for. You need to get organized. It sounds obvious, but you really need to figure out how to organize your calendar. Hopefully you have some degree of autonomy over your calendar. So things like using time blocks for focused work is really important. If you're struggling with your calendar and you feel like you turn up to work, or if you're working from home, you log on expecting to do one thing and you never get that thing done, then I'd encourage you to kind of like maybe look into some time management techniques and look at things like time blocking, because that could be really useful for you. Line manager buy-in is absolutely critical. So having line manager buy-in for what you do within the ERG and running the network is so important. If your line manager isn't really bought into it, it can become a source of conflict, and you could potentially almost find yourself under scrutiny and potentially almost looking at some sort of like performance improvement plan. That can happen if your line manager isn't fully bought in. And then the final one here in terms of day job, seek feedback often, right? So if you're not getting feedback about how you're performing, ask for it, right? Don't be afraid to ask for it. Good morning, Sophia. How are you doing? Clear boundaries, really important for self-care too. Absolutely. And I say this as somebody, I have worked for some really challenging bosses. I mean, like if anybody remembers the film The Devil Wears Prada, I think I've said this before on a LinkedIn Live. Don't go digging too far back into my LinkedIn profile, but I used to have a boss that we used to call Miranda, which was the Melanie Streep character in The Devil Wears Prada. Ridiculous deadlines. You'd sort of wake up in the morning to a barrage of emails asking for certain things. So I know what that's like, but there is a way to set boundaries, even having conversations with individuals like that sort of says, I'm not going to be picking up emails after 6 o'clock in the evening. When I get into work at 9 o'clock, that's when I'm going to pick up my emails, right? So there is a way to do it. And a big, one of the strategies that's actually quite important is if you know how to build relationships well. So if you're good at kind of building human social connection, it actually makes it easier to manage difficult managers and manage difficult bosses and set those boundaries in a way that will feel respectful of the individual, but they'll know that that's your hard line, right? You're not going to be working at all hours of the night or day. So yeah, absolutely, Sophia. Clear boundaries is incredibly important for self-care. So seeking feedback often, clarifying instructions, so if you work for somebody who can be a little bit flaky maybe with instructions, clarifying what those instructions are, what the expectation is, and then checking in regularly makes sure that you don't fall foul of people thinking that you haven't got time for your day job because you're too busy off running this network. Okay. Sponsors, I can't really say enough about the importance of sponsors. And as it says there at the bottom of the slide, who's speaking up for you when you're not in the room? Because the reality is when it comes to promotions, particularly the more senior you get, a lot of these promotions are decided in rooms that you are not in, right? So they're often decided behind closed doors. So when you're not in that room, who's speaking up for you, right? That is what a sponsor does. And whether or not you ask them formally or informally to be a sponsor, you don't necessarily need to have that slightly awkward conversation that says, will you be my sponsor? But actually there is something about, just having things like, coffee catch-ups with a senior individual who has got influence and has got clout, talking about where you're trying to get to in your career, talking about whether they've got any projects on at the moment that you can get involved in. I know that's going to sound a bit like you're volunteering for more work, but if it means that you become really visible to a senior leader whose area you maybe want to get a role in at some point down the line, that is worth it. Okay. So sponsors, somebody once asked me, how would they know if they have a sponsor, right? So that's why I've got that question there. Do you have one? one of the ways that you'll know you've got a sponsor is if somebody tells you that, for example, there was a board meeting, say, and that particular individual stood up for you or mentioned you, mentioned that you were really good at X, Y, and Z, or a new project came up or a new piece of work, and that individual says, oh, have you thought about Cheryl for that role, right? That will tell you that there is a sponsor in the room that is speaking up for you when you're not in the room, whether or not you've even asked for it, right? And that basically is what a sponsor does. So, in terms of promotions, a lot of these conversations, they're often called things like calibration meetings, where HR, along with the leaders in an organization, look at performance and how people are doing and who is ready for that next promotion. You need to know that there's somebody in that room speaking up for you when you're not in the room, right? It's not all about, I know a lot of people sometimes think, oh, it's unfair, that person got promoted and I didn't even see the job advertised and all of that. It's not illegal to put somebody in a job when it's not being advertised, right? Most companies have a policy of, we will advertise all roles, but it's not illegal, at least not here in the UK, right? And a lot of these conversations happen behind closed doors. Is such and such ready for that next move? When should we think about moving them up, etc.? What else do they need to become ready, right? So it's really important. If you aren't aware of those processes, have a chat with your HR lead. If you're running an ERG and you aren't aware of those kind of talent management conversations that happen, have a conversation with HR and get clued up, and or your line manager, right? And again, get clued up and make sure that they understand what your aspirations are for when they are going into those conversations. So skills gaps. When it comes to promotions, I've sometimes had people say to me, I'm constantly being overlooked for a promotion. And I was doing a fireside chat the once with an exec sponsor. This was actually for an employee network in the US. So I was doing a virtual session where I was interviewing two execs, further on in their career, and asking them about what they had done to advance their careers, what had been important. And all sorts of things came up, sponsors, mentors, getting international experience was one of the things that one of those execs spoke about. But the one thing that really stood out to me, and this is going back a couple of years, but one said whenever a promotion or an opportunity would come up that they were quite interested in, they would say to the person that was hiring or their line manager at the time, what would I need to be able to be ready for that next role? What skills would I need? What experience would I need? And actually, just in asking that question, it did two things. First of all, it signaled that you wanted that move. It signaled the aspiration to move into that kind of role. And secondly, you were able to get real clarity. So you can get real clarity of what it is that somebody is looking for you to be able to proceed into that role. And certainly, if that is around, achieving certain things or gathering certain experience, this is where it can be really useful to start logging your achievements and your accomplishments, right? On a weekly basis, a weekly achievements log that says, okay, I was involved in that this week, or, I did a really good job at that. Things that demonstrate your skills, demonstrate you delivering business value. And even better, and I was saying this to somebody literally yesterday, even better if you can get feedback from some of the individuals you're working with, again, around when you have demonstrated new skills, they can come back to you with an email and say, it was great the way that you did X, Y, and Z. And then when you then go to have your next development conversation or performance appraisal with your manager, you've got this body of evidence. What it also does, actually, it helps to build your confidence. So for people that are maybe suffering with imposter syndrome or feeling self-doubt, which is quite common. There's this whole thing called stereotype threat, which I was going to go into, but it's too big a topic for today. So maybe I'll leave that for another day. But self-doubt can really affect you, especially if you constantly see yourself through this lens of a minoritized identity. That can really mess with your head. So one way of getting over that is to start logging your achievements and your accomplishments so that, you're then ready for that conversation around, am I ready for that next promotion? Other ways that you can fill in the skills gap. So I keep mentioning projects. It's a really good way of other people in the organization, particularly more senior individuals, seeing you So you become more visible and seeing what you're capable of. And that's really what you want that sponsor to see. You don't want a sponsor to just be sponsoring you out of the goodness of their heart, right? When they don't know you from a can of paint. So as my daughter would say, right. So you want ideally to be delivering work in a capacity where this senior individual can see what you're made of, what you can do. And often projects, programs, big strategic initiatives, they're often the way that you can get involved in those, and then those senior sponsors can see what you can do. Obviously you've got things like courses and formal training or self-learning. I mean, and I say this as somebody who, so many years ago I did an MBA, but I would caution collecting courses and qualifications just for the sake of it and or on their own, because I do think on their own they're probably not going to do it, and they're nowhere near as powerful as a sponsor. So yes, if you've got maybe a technical skills gap rather than a non-technical skills gap. If you've got a technical skills gap and you need to go on a specific course, then absolutely fine. And or then coaching. So if you've got a gap in terms of any non-technical skills, then this is where something like coaching, whether it be leadership coaching or some of those elements, whether it be like commercial understanding or commercial awareness or strategic, whether that be an external coach that your organization brings in, if you're lucky enough to have that, or an internal coach. So maybe there is a peer or again, a senior individual that you can have a couple of sessions with. I remember there was a time in my career when I was really leaning into like program management and project management. And I remember having some conversations with people that I'd spotted in the organization that were very good, seemed to be very, very good at leading and managing projects and programs. And I would go and kind of have coffee with them and pick their brains about what worked and what didn't work, etc. So start to get really creative in terms of how you fill in these skills gaps. And then in terms of moves, sometimes when we talk about career advancement, we're sometimes limited because we're thinking just about our boss's job, right? That role that's just immediately above us. But actually, there are all kinds of ways of advancing one's career. So that could be sideways, kind of what I call like a horizontal move sideways, particularly, if you've just got maybe a couple of skills that you're trying to build up, or if you want to build your awareness and knowledge of the business or of the sector of the industry, a horizontal move can be really good for doing that and actually can stand you in quite good stead for the next move, which could then be upwards. So don't always turn your nose up at a sideways move, right? They can be quite useful. And then obviously we've got the vertical move then, so going straight upwards. So assuming that you have got the technical skills as well as the non-technical skills that prove you're ready to kind of like push up into that next level, you've got the vertical move. Can be difficult, obviously, if particularly if you're in a smaller organization and there are quite a few sort of like managers that aren't going anywhere above you. A vertical move can be a bit of a blocker if you've only got your mind set on that. So that's something to bear in mind. And then you've got potentially a diagonal move, and this is where Amanda, good morning, Amanda. How are you doing? Lateral moves should be seen as a positive. I completely agree with that. I think they are completely underrated. And, as somebody that, started my career in finance, there are definitely some benefits, whether it's within your discipline or your function, or, ideally within another function. So if you can, stepping into another function, especially if you've got some transferable skills that you can apply in that to sort of broaden out your experience, that means as you start to then go up the ladder, you are a much more rounded, well-rounded manager and leader, right? If you've got those additional skills of how different areas of the business work. So absolutely, Amanda, couldn't agree with that more. Definitely should be seen as a positive. And then something I talk about is diagonal skills. So, you're doing an upwards move, but also kind of going slightly sideways as well. So maybe you're moving upwards, but in a slightly different space, either within your function or your area of the business, or within another function. And that's something you can do. So my experience of of these moves, and when does it tend to be easiest? And I'm sort of leaning on some of my transformation experience, where I've often, sort of like been working very closely with HR and slotting people into place and all of those sorts of things. Diagonal, I think that's maybe diagonal with a question mark. So diagonal as in, so rather than going for my boss's job, I maybe go slightly, I'm still going upwards, maybe to the same level as my line manager, but in a slightly almost kind of sideways move. Yeah, diagonal, interesting. So my experience is that within the organization that you're in, it is much easier to stay in that organization and move sideways or vertical or diagonal, because hopefully if you've done a good job and you've delivered and enough people have seen that you can deliver, um, it will be easier for people to kind of say, do you know what, we've seen what Cheryl can do. I would trust her to go into that next move, and actually we'll put support around her and make sure that she's set up for success, right? So it's easier because you've already got that reputation of what you've done in the organization. So I always say, don't jump so quickly. If you're thinking, oh, I keep getting passed over for promotion, I would say try some of the other strategies first, particularly the one around getting visibility with key stakeholders. Try that first. Don't just assume, oh, I'm just getting blocked here and I've just got my head down and nobody sees what I'm doing, therefore I'm going to leave, because it's not necessarily going to be rosier when you go elsewhere. And when you go somewhere else, especially if you have a minority identity, right? So if you are female, or you have a disability, or you are of an ethnic minority, depending on the organization that you go into, or you're LGBTQ plus, etc. So you're in the minority, it can actually be harder to establish that credibility, right? To get people to realize how good you are. So it's not going to be a quick fix in terms of getting that promotion to just leave. So I always say, explore all of the options, upwards, sideways, diagonal before you leave. Don't just kind of like be so quick to jump. And then, so before I move on, Sophia, it's really great that these opportunities exist. Vertical, diagonal, and horizontal support is key from leadership and peers. Do you think are peers important here? I do think that. And I think, yeah, in large organizations, so if you're in an organization that's got any more than, 500 employees, for example, so anybody that's working in an organization that's got 1,000 or more, and obviously there are lots of organizations with X,000 people working in them, there are often lots of opportunities if we open our eyes to them, in terms of going in different ways. And that's something that, whether it be talking to your line manager, or, establishing a kind of like sponsor relationship with a senior leader and or peers, but getting advice from peers about, what could my next move be? These are the skills that I've got. These are the skills I've developed from leading the ERG. What kind of move do you think I could make? What would my skills be a good match for? So I think peers are absolutely critical. I've used peers so much in my career, finding out the good people that are good at things that you maybe aren't that good at, or are good at the things that you've done but to the next level, and talking to them about how you can take your skills to the next level, I think is critical. So having those career conversations very broadly, almost like in that kind of 360 way, I think is really important, Sophia. So that's a really good point. And then my final slide. So, back to this thing about employee network leaders sometimes feeling as though they have been pigeonholed. So pigeonholed, as an activist, or pigeonholed as somebody that only delivers when it comes to network stuff. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody yesterday, one of my alumni from the course. And the one thing that she always says to me, she says that the challenge she is given in her organization, her superiors, her sort of bosses and things kind of say to her, we love what you're doing in the network, but we want to see that same delivery in your day job. So how do you make that happen? In particular, how do you kind of draw out the things that you are doing within the network and really make sure that they are delivering business value? Because I actually think if more employee network leaders were doing that, were tying in what they are doing for their network to business value and business goals, I think they would be getting less of a hard time. And I actually think it would actually be easier to get that next promotion by demonstrating that what you are doing in your network role delivers clear business value, okay? Rather than people that are kind of on the outside of the network just seeing it as this internal kind of insular kind of thing that's only for the benefit of employees, right? And we know that if it's for the benefit of the employees, it therefore benefits the business, right? We get that, right? But we sometimes need to make that link really clear. So first of all, just really quickly in our last few minutes, mature network. So if your network is early stages, you are still just going to be in that community building, right? And you are probably going to have quite an internal focus, and that's absolutely fine, right? I get that. And when I say early stage networks, I'm on about like the first couple of years where you've maybe literally just formed and you're just about, creating that sense of belonging for individuals, making them feel like they're not the only one. So if you're in that early stage, that is primarily going to be your focus. Obviously, it still links to employee engagement and your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging targets, right? And for the organization as a whole. But the more mature you are as a network, the more I would expect you to be able, as a network leader, to start talking the language of strategic business goals and objectives so that you can demonstrate how the network is delivering real value. And actually, one of the keys, I would say, in terms of moving from being a very tactical network that is mainly focused on, awareness days and all of that, which is great. When I always feel sometimes as though I'm poo-pooing the awareness days when I talk about that. I'm not doing that per se, but there is more to employee networks than just awareness days and speakers and all of that. There is real strategic work in terms of making sure that that your knowledge, your resources, your opinions are shared widely across the business where they are needed. So I know that quite a few organizations now are getting their ERGs to not only be internal facing in terms of employees, but actually using employee resource groups more in terms of understanding the needs of their customer and client base, right? Especially if you are in an organization that is consumer facing. How do you get this employee network to tap into and kind of bring their understanding of the needs of a diverse customer base, right? So as a network leader, start having conversations with the heads of operations, sales, and marketing. The other major area in terms of this link into operational performance is supplier diversity. For example, lots of organizations have supplier diversity programs. If you're watching this and you're an ERG leader and you don't know if your organization has a supplier diversity program, why don't you know is my first question. You need to find out. You need to go and speak to somebody in procurement and see whether there is a way that as a network leader you can get involved in that and see whether there is any alignment and anything that you can partner on with that, right? This is where you're starting to demonstrate that you understand that broader value of the employee network beyond just kind of like this insular employee group. Silos versus collaborative, all senior leader, part of the more you advance up an organization, we all want to make sure that we run things in an organization in a way that is not siloed. It's something that's always talked about. So you need to demonstrate that you can work collaboratively with your fellow employee network leaders. So do you run things like joint events? Do you talk about joint challenges and joint solutions? And then also obviously collaborating with different teams, different departments. So offering up yourself to go in and talk to different departments and visit some team meetings and talk about what it is that your network does and ask, how can I help this team, right? And then, I've talked about it linking to business goals. So, Sophia, your point here, awareness days are okay as an injection, but it's the sustained approach and consistent, I think maybe messaging that makes a difference. I see this in the faith-based setting too. That's really interesting. Yeah, this should absolutely apply almost like to any setting. And then, it links to this final one, the link to business goals. And I think what you're saying there, Sophia, and the consistent messaging, as an employee network leader, you absolutely need to understand how what you are doing as a network links to business goals. And if you're not clear, as I was saying to somebody yesterday, get the glossies, as I call them, the annual report and accounts, the glossy version that goes on your website. Get the glossies out and read what's in the, the director's reports at the front, or the operational report, because that's where, your CEO, the chair, the directors talk about what is important for the business. And if you can understand how what you do contributes to that, and any specific measures and targets, you're onto a winner. And then, as you were saying, Sophie, it's that consistent messaging, and being able to talk that talk. So therefore, when it comes to things like conversations with potential sponsors, etc., you're able to talk about the network, not just in terms of, oh yeah, we meet as a group and this is what we're about. You can actually put it into business speak. It's absolutely invaluable. So that's my final tip. It's how you make sure that the work you do in the network is seen as adding business value. That is it. I've gone slightly over time by all of 45 seconds. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're watching live, thank you for those of you watching live and for contributing. If you're watching on the replay, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And if you do have any employee network leaders, and they're struggling with juggling the day job and all of those sorts of things, please do share this recording with them, and hopefully it will be of some use. That's it. If you're in the UK, happy Friday, happy weekend. Hopefully we've got some good weather to come, right? That's it. I'm out of here. Take care. See you next week.